All right, fam, so we got to talk about this here. So this is where Gambit becomes a Horseman. So Apocalypse is Horseman here. Now, it looks like based on X-Men 97 that this is where this is going to end up bleeding into, where we're going to get the resurrection of Gambit, probably in that series, and then he's going to become the Death Horseman. Now, this happened in the comics, specifically in the Blood of Apocalypse storyline. Now, this was written back in the 90s, like 1991 around there. It's like a total of 6 issues in the X-Men comics. And there's actually a prologue that was written for this as well in the Cable and Deadpool comics. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here. Now, important to mention here is that Apocalypse is resurrected, right? Sometime after the Genosha genocide, which killed 16 million mutants, as we found out specifically in House of X and in the Fall of X comics. And also, this happens after the Scarlet Witch thing, where Scarlet Witch, so what happens is Scarlet Witch decided that she wanted to eradicate the mutant gene. So what she did is that she used her powers and removed 90% of mutants' powers. Like so out of all the mutants, 90% of them lost their powers literally overnight, which is crazy and kind of like, what a jerk move, Scarlet Witch. So what that leaves is the 198, right? Which is the number of mutant refugees that still have their mutant powers, and they're all cooped up in this Xavier Institute. Now, Professor X is not around right now, and Cyclops is the one that is leading the mutant thing. He also is not I wanted to say shacking it up, but his girlfriend is Emma Frost. We'll have to explore that story a little bit later on. Now, the other X-Men members that are in this series are Rogue, Beast, Havoc comes back to the team here. We have Iceman, Mystique joins the X-Men. We have Colossus, mentioned Emma Frost already, and of course we have Gambit. Now, one other character I wanted to talk about here really quickly, because he's going to show up a little bit later on, or is going to be important a little bit later on, is Augustus, because Augustus, aka Pulse, that's his mutant name or crime fighting name. He's actually not really a crime fighter, he's kind of like a thief, but Pulse is kind of funny because he's a little bit of a scaredy cat right now. His powers, one of them is power negation, meaning that he can disable other mutants' powers within the vicinity of him, which is actually why Mystique wanted him around, because he wanted Rogue to be with him, because Rogue's death touch would not affect Pulse, right? So she believes that because Gambit can't touch her, that she's never really gonna ever be able to be truly happy, and that Pulse is her best chance of becoming happy. But either way, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit here about Apocalypse, right? So he's obviously the main crux of this story, and another piece that's really a major part of this story, being that it's Blood of Apocalypse, is the Blood of Apocalypse. Now, Apocalypse is, as we all know, right? He's one of the first mutants among the race of mutants, right? He has advanced physiology, he has some healing factor, some other powers that he was able to receive here from the Celestials. And then if we jump into like the Cable and Deadpool series, which was written by Fabian Nicieza here, they mentioned how Cable went back into the past and killed Apocalypse or slash Apocalypse, or somebody that was in that past timeline when Apocalypse was around, and Cable's blood ended up getting mixed with that of Apocalypse. Now remember, Cable's blood has the techno-organic virus in it. So when that was combined with Apocalypse's blood, it then gave Apocalypse the ability to do 2 things. Number 1, he can now be resurrected over and over and over again. They talked about this in the Cable and Deadpool comics. So it doesn't matter what, anytime he dies, he's going to be able to resurrect, come back, kill more people, die again. You know, the cycle goes on and on, the circle of life, the Ouroboros, if we want to call it that way. But then the additional part of it now is that he is able to heal the body of other people, and that's going to come into play here as we move forward. Additionally, because of the Sphinx that he's in as well, that's what they're able to use to resurrect Apocalypse, like this little Sphinx ship. I'm probably saying that name wrong, but let's move on. Now, what his plan is here is, just to keep it a hundo with you, is that Apocalypse wants to wipe out 90% of humanity. That's not a surprise number. That's a number specifically because only 90% of the mutants have their powers and all that. So that's what he wants to do. He wants to wipe out 90% of the human population. He wants, in his mind, what he says is that he wants to level the playing field, because Ozymandias, who is Apocalypse's scribe, right-hand man, was asking him a question like, why are we only picking 90% of the humans to, or why are we picking 10% of the humans to survive? And his logic was, well, I want only the mutants who prove themselves worthy. Still want to be able to give them some opposition, but only if they're worthy am I going to save them. So the way that Apocalypse wants to wipe out humanity and wipe out 90% of humanity is that he is going to administer across the earth all the deadly viruses, right? Influenza, SARS, anthrax, you name it, whatever you could possibly think of that was around back in that time. He wants to unleash that on the entirety of the human race. And the only way that they will be able to be saved is by what? Drinking his blood. That is the only way that they're going to be able to survive it. And it's kind of the same thing with the mutants too, right? Like, if the mutants want to be on his side and if they want to follow him and basically claim him as their messiah, then he will give them the blood, which is the antidote, so that they can survive what is coming, basically the genocide that is coming. My issue with this is, number one, it's genocide. So I mean, that's the clear one. Like that's the problem. The other portion of it too is that you're also going to be putting out these plagues and these diseases and everything like that to other people that are not mutants, because all really Apocalypse cares about is mutants and saving mutants. But what about like the Avengers who are in this series as well? What about like Fantastic Four, who was mentioned? And then what about like other good humans who support mutants? Like it's just like do we not care about those people? So ultimately Apocalypse only cares about mutants, right? And that's how he's going to go about doing this thing. Now, if we got to remember too a little bit about Apocalypse and sort of like his nature as a character. Number one, of course, he was enhanced and given some powers here by the Celestials. And what the Celestials want for him to do is that they want him to basically build up humanity, make them stronger, not specifically humanity, but build up Earth, the strongest of Earth, and build them up so that when they come back, you know, I guess they'll be surprised, but no, they're really just going to destroy it anyways. But the point is, they gave him this mandate to be able to build up this unit. But what Apocalypse wants to do is that, yes, he's going to build up the strongest of humanity and try to, you know, get them to be tip-top shape and ready for the Celestials, because he wants to be able to use them to defeat the Celestials, because he doesn't want to be slave to them anymore. So that's his whole thing. Like, Celestials want one thing, Apocalypse wants kind of something similar, but he wants something similar only so that he can eventually be able to defeat these Celestials. So that is pretty much basically what he's trying to do. Now, if I didn't mention this before, how he wants to administer these drugs is that he wants to use his Horseman, specifically Pestilence, to administer all of these deadly viruses against humanity, against Earth. Now, we're going to talk about who the Pestilence Horseman is in a little bit here, but let's talk about the other Horsemen that are a part of this. So the first one is the Horseman of War. Now, this Horseman, there was a guy named Gazer. He was actually one of the mutants that lost his abilities, who was actually, at this point when we pick him up in issue 181, was trying to unalive himself. Like, he was trying to, you know, end his whole life here. So Apocalypse stopped him, and after this like one-on-one battle between Gazer and then this other doctor. So what happens here is actually kind of funny, because Apocalypse is just like, here are these two guys, these are the two candidates to be my War Horsemen. Put them in a 1v1 matchup. Whoever wins this matchup will become my War Horseman. So the doctor had the upper hand against Gazer, but then Ozymandias now comes in and then stabs the doctor in the back, saving Gazer. It was basically like to Gazer, listen, I just saved your life. You owe me. I'm gonna want you to kind of pay me back now later on in the future. So then Gazer goes on, gets tortured by the celestial machine that is inside of the Sphinx that Apocalypse is in, and transforms him into the War Horseman. Now, the next Horseman here is going to be Sunfire, Shiro. I'm not exactly trying to say that, but Sunfire, right? He becomes the next Horseman. So he lost his legs in a previous fight with Lady Deathstrike. So Apocalypse goes and sees him in the bed, and it's just like, fam, like, listen, you ain't in good shape, my guy. I could make you better. I could give you your legs back. I could even make you stronger. Of course, Sunfire is a little bit reluctant to this, because he's like, yo, like, you're Apocalypse, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Why would I trust you of all people? And he eventually goes with him. Same thing. So what's funny is that he gets bounded in this little dungeon or whatever, and he's hearing Gazer go through the transformation process of becoming a horseman. So Sunfire is like freaking out. He's like, yo, I don't want to be here, dude. I don't want to be a part of this. But, you know, he's a hero, right? So he goes to try to save Gazer and then gets caught by Apocalypse and then ends up becoming the horseman anyways. So he is the famine horseman, which is, so with he was the first one. So when Apocalypse actually goes to Xavier Institute to go recruit all the other X-Men and tell him the story to become his horseman, Sunfire was the first horseman that was unleashed on them. And because whenever Sunfire emits this light in the sky, something happens that causes them to feel incredibly hungry. So, and what Emma Frost was explaining is that because it gets like that light gets into like the retina of your eye, it gets then into your brain, and then that function somewhere there just makes you start to think that you're really, 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 really hungry. And that was, you know, kind of an effect here of the Famine Horseman. Then, of course, let's bring ourselves here to the Death Horseman. Now, this one is big, right? Because, like I said, Apocalypse has shown up at the Xavier Mansion. He unleashed Sunfire. The War Horseman was still there, kind of chilling in the background. Now, while this battle is kind of getting started, so Remy Gambit decides to sneak his way into the ship. I thought this was actually pretty funny because I'm like, Gambit of all people would be one of the people that would be able to sneak into a ship, considering his past, that he would be able to do that. So then he starts having this little conversation here with Apocalypse, and he's like, listen, you know, I don't even know why I'm here. Like, Apocalypse is like, hey, I knew you would come. But then Gambit's just like, bro, I don't even know why I'm here. In all honesty, like I almost didn't even make it to this point. But, you know, I need something different. And basically what Gambit is saying to him is like, listen, I've tried the X-Men way. It's not worked. This is dark times. Because remember, this is after Genosha. This is after as well what Scarlet Witch did to the mutants. So and of course, humans still really kind of don't like, largely a lot of them still don't like the mutants. So he's like, you know, maybe going a darker approach, maybe going with a darker way is the best way for me to be able to do this. So then he eventually, you know, drinks the blood from Apocalypse here so that he can become immune whenever the time comes. And then he also goes through this little transformation as well. You can see him, he gets strapped up. Apocalypse is telling him that like, hey, Gambit's like, yo, what is digging into my spine? So you can kind of see a little bit more here or get an idea as to what, you know, Apocalypse does to allow these people to become his horsemen. And, you know, the dialogue here is pretty interesting because Gambit is like, because Apocalypse is like, you hate the X-Men. And Gambit's like, no, don't get me wrong here. I actually really love the X-Men. That's the reason why I'm actually doing this. It's just that I feel like this is the only way for me to actually realistically be able to save my X-Men is by going through this particular transformation. So we kind of fast forward here. Now, Ozymandias, remember I said he was kind of always planning to betray Apocalypse here. So he goes out and he gets some of the X-Men and he sneaks them into the ship for Apocalypse. They eventually end up coming face to face with the Death Horseman, who of course, as we know now, is Gambit. And I gotta say, like, Gambit, I'm not usually like a major fan of like this kind of like dark looking look of Gambit, but man, he looks pretty good with the red eyes, the black face, the white hair. You know, you're looking at like the straps, the belts on him and everything, and he looks pretty damn good. Now, one of the things that he can do here as the War Horseman is that he emits this gas that can pretty much basically like suffocate you, and he goes toe to toe here with the X-Men. So Iceman, so actually he was about to like stomp on Rogue's face. Like Rogue was just like, no, Remy. And he was about to stomp on Rogue's face here. Now Iceman saves her, but then Gambit just like slams his behind to the floor. And then what later on happens here is that Iceman accidentally destroys all of Apocalypse's blood, which of course, as we remember now, is the antidote that he needs to be able to use to save humanity after Pestilence unleashes all these viruses on the Earth. So it definitely has some ramifications here. As we kind of fast forward, Apocalypse, you know, decides to change his plan. He visits the UN and basically tells them, hey, now since his antidote is all spilled, it's destroyed. He's like, all right, I can't unleash my pestilence anymore across this entire Earth, so that, you know, you guys can kind of make a decision to come to me or not. now he's like, okay, listen, this is your choice. You have to now kill 90% of your people. Like, that's it. Like, you kill, since I can't unleash my pestilence now because I can't give you my antidote. You are now gonna have to kill 90% of your people yourself. And it's like, I don't know what exactly he was thinking here. He does mention that humans have been cruel to each other from the beginning of time. So he's like, oh, listen, I wouldn't be quite surprised here if some of them actually agree. And some of them, there was some indication that some of them were actually considering and thinking of actually killing 90%, because it's just like, what's the alternative here? Apocalypse wipes all of us out? I mean, we can sacrifice 90%, can we not? Which is an interesting turn of events. But the rest of the story, it's kind of lackluster, if you ask me, because after like seeing Gambit, after seeing some of the little matchups here that happen, there really isn't much else to talk about. We do find out eventually who the Pestilence Horseman is, and it's a she, and it is Polaris. Now, the reason why this is a big reveal is because a lot of people thought Polaris was dead. Remember, Havoc was with Polaris, and when he came back, Iceman was asking him questions like, yo, what happened to Polaris? Now, Polaris had been dealing with a character named the Leper Queen, and the Leper Queen, something happened there. I don't necessarily know the entirety of the story, but I know that Polaris had lost her powers. So that was the way that Apocalypse actually used Polaris to become her horseman, by like appealing to that side, like, hey, I can give you your powers back. Yeah, but she's like, you're Apocalypse, but she's like, but I can give you your powers back. I can make you better, kind of thing. So that she ends up kind of going along with it. He actually was considering having the Leper Queen be his horseman before, but because the Leper Queen wanted to be the horseman too much, he didn't want to allow her to be a horseman or horsewoman, I should say. Right. So then Polaris becomes the Pestilence Horseman. That is like, kind of like I said, that's like the big reveal. The rest of the story is not that exciting. Yes, there is like a big battle where we get to see some advanced Sentinels go up against Apocalypse. The X-Men get to go up against Apocalypse. Augustus, who was a scaredy cat, actually gets close to Apocalypse, negates his powers so that he cannot do anything. They ended up banishing him into the Shadow Realm. I'm kidding. They banish him into the Sphinx. He ends up going face to face with the Celestials again, like on the monitor screen. And it kind of ends there. There's not really much excitement to it from there. But the big story here, or the big part of the story, is that Gambit does become the Death Horseman of the Apocalypse. I think it was really cool. This is something that could definitely play out here in the X-Men 97 series, because we do see the Easter egg here of the card at the very end of the X-Men 97 series, where I think it's Queen of Spades or something like that he is holding. So this could definitely come up in the series here, where we can see Gambit become the War Horseman, because Apocalypse could resurrect Gambit. I gotta say this though, all the horsemen that he selected pretty much had faults, right? Like, you look at it, Gazer didn't have any powers, lost his powers, and then he took him on and made him a horseman. Sunfire didn't have any more legs, took him on to become a horseman. Gambit felt left out, felt like he was essentially no longer needed as a part of the team, and then he made him a horseman. And then Polaris didn't have her powers and things like that, and then he made her a horseman. I'm starting to think that maybe Apocalypse is a fixer. Maybe his motives are wrong, but ultimately, Apocalypse just seems like a really caring guy that really loves mutants. Either way, let me know what you think about this story. I appreciate y'all watching. Let me know what else y'all want me to cover here on the channel. I'm gonna be starting to do it some Deadpool stuff here, so that should be coming out pretty relatively soon. And until next time, and as always, guys, thank you so much for kicking it with Keepin the Comic.